Today's event is a hybrid, or has a hybrid format with presenters, panelists, and an audience here in person at City Hall, as well as participants who are joining us online. I'm sure, of course, that the irony of holding, at least in part, an online event about digital exclusion will not be lost on anyone. Nevertheless, for those of us who are joining remotely, I hope you are hearing and seeing us clearly, and I really do hope that this medium will not prevent you taking part as fully as you would like to in our event. And to those of you who have joined us here today in Docklands, a special thank you for making it in on a day when getting around the capital has been perhaps a little less straightforward than usual. As well as this being a hybrid event with people joining us remotely, we are live streaming to our YouTube channel. We also have a photographer and a videographer here today. So please do let yourself be known to one of the team if you do not wish to feature in any way. And as usual with these sorts of events, if you have mobile devices, please make sure that they're either switched off or switched to silence. Now, in a moment, my colleague Sasha Langeveld will present the findings from our report before we hear from a panel of commentators chaired by Callum Marius from My London, and of course giving you all a chance here and online to ask questions. Before then, I'd like to make a few remarks, and I should start by saying, of course, a bit about what our report is about. It seeks to understand how far Londoners are being left behind as transport providers in the capital increasingly use digital technology as the means by which people interact with transport services. In doing so, it first identifies those people who might be described as the digitally excluded, that is, the people who are unable or unwilling ever to go online, and the digitally disadvantaged, that is, people who carry out relatively few activities online. The report goes on to illustrate how they are affected, and then, as you'll hear from Sasha, makes 9 recommendations about what should be done as a result. This is the first piece of commissioned insight which we are publishing at TravelWatch since I arrived at the organization some 2 months ago. I'm delighted to be part of today's launch, but to be fair, the credit is due to my predecessor, Emma Gibson, under whose leadership this report was initiated, the many organizations and individuals who, alongside Yonder, have contributed to its content, and to the members of the London TravelWatch team, most especially Sasha, who have lived and breathed this project in recent months. One thing that has struck me about the report Left Behind Londoners is how this single report embraces what for me are the 3 key dimensions that I hope will underpin our ongoing wider programme of work on behalf of the travelling public in London. First, it addresses an issue that affects the many and not just the few. Remarkably, as you will hear, 1 in 6 of those who answered our survey, or the equivalent of 1.5 million Londoners, said they had been unable to buy a ticket without a smartphone or internet connection, and that had stopped them from travelling. Second, the report shines an important light on an important but as yet relatively little appreciated story. For many of us, digital technology is a positive force in so many aspects of our lives, including, of course, transport. But for some of our fellow citizens, the same technology can be a barrier, not just once, but indeed twice or many times over, for example, where that person is both older and disabled. Third, the report touches on a subject where, with the right mindset, it should be possible to promote positive change. TravelWatch's success a couple of years ago in convincing TfL to drop its plans to make all stations in London go cashless should give us all hope that the drive to go digital first can be done while catering for those for whom this is a challenge. And before I hand over to Sasha, I would like to make a couple of final observations. While the decision to commission today's report was inspired by concerns that some people are being left behind, it is equally important to say that we at London TravelWatch are not anti-technology in some way. We, of course, recognise that digital technology helps many of the people at the centre of this report get around on London transport, and that some of them actually are often early adopters of new technologies compared with the overall population. Furthermore, we readily recognise that digital technologies can help transport providers cut costs at a time when they, like all of us, face significant financial pressures, for example, by encouraging more passengers to buy tickets online rather than in person. But if that is done in a way which comes at the detriment of digitally excluded people, who might therefore be unfairly discouraged from using public transport, we would argue not only is that just wrong, but actually that it's also potentially counterproductive in terms of fewer passengers and ultimately lower revenue. So we hope then that today's report will not just help raise awareness about digital exclusion and disadvantage associated with transport in London, but also inspire further research into this issue and ultimately greater commitment to address its impacts. So thank you here and online for listening to me, and let me hand over to Sasha, who will take you through the report's findings in greater detail. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, apologies for my very nasally voice. I have got a slight cold. But thank you, Michael, for introducing our great report. So now I'm going to be talking about who is affected and look at the key findings of our report. So as Michael alluded to, if I change the slide, as Michael alluded to in his speech, digitally excluded or disadvantaged people fall into two categories. Those who cannot go online because they have because of the barriers that they face, or those who do not want to go online. Compared to Londoners overall, digitally excluded and disadvantaged people are more likely to be older, a disabled person, and a person on lower income. Our research found that these categories often interplay and overlap. So digitally excluded or disadvantaged people may be older and a disabled person, meaning they face multiple barriers. So now you'll hear from a few case studies who are also here today about their impacts.
For the majority of people I come in contact, especially particularly the over 70s, they certainly 2/3 aren't online and don't know how to get online and don't have the digital skills to be able to achieve that.
I am very fortunate in that I have 3 members of my family living near me who will actually do something that I can't actually do.
I can't use a smart device or smartphones and mobile phones easily. In fact, I can't use them at all due to the nature of my disability. Not all people can, and to go headlong into this digitalization is a backward step and will put people like myself who are vulnerable become even more isolated and excluded from society.
There's this kind of assumption that there's always an app for everything. Well, apps are fine if you can use a smartphone. Certainly, a large majority of older people don't own smartphones. One, because they can't afford them, they can't afford the broadband connection, etc. Two, in my case, I can't see the screen because it's so small.
So here we'll look at how travel is impacted by digital exclusion. So our research found that 1 in 6 Londoners have said that they are unable to buy a ticket without a smartphone or internet connection. 1 in 5 Londoners have said that they had to pay more for travel because they couldn't buy a ticket online or digitally. And finally, 1 in 5 people said that digitally disadvantaged and exclusion who agreed that technology has made things harder for them. The digitally excluded and disadvantaged has a huge impact on people's lives, well-being, independence, and confidence in managing many aspects of their lives. This can lead to a lot of people feeling left out of society. Limitations to travel have a profound consequences on individuals, especially those who face other barriers. Digitally disadvantaged and excluded people are more likely to make fewer journeys across London. These barriers have stopped many people from traveling, which means almost around 1.5 million Londoners are being left behind. So support from staff and information from ticket offices is two ways that digitally excluded and disadvantaged people access for help while traveling in London. Digitally excluded and disadvantaged people have less access to tools and services which facilitate them to traveling around London. Digitally excluded or disadvantaged people especially rely on TfL staff and staff in general to be able to travel around the capital confidently, be it for journey planning, purchasing tickets or advice, or knowing that help is just available when they need it. We'll now hear from another case studies of the further impact of digital exclusion.
I can't use a ticket machine. It's impossible. So what happened many years ago, a few years ago, when a situation did occur, there was no one in the ticket office to issue a ticket. I got on the train without a ticket. I sat down and sure enough, ticket inspector came along and asked me for my tickets. I said, I haven't got a ticket. Can I pay at the other end? And he looked puzzled and said, why haven't you got a ticket? And I explained, I can't, there was nobody there to issue me a ticket. And anyway, under the Equalities Act 2010, public sector equalities duty, there's got to be other ways to issue tickets for help so that people like myself can use the system. He kind of didn't quite know what to do at the end. I think he just said, I'll pay at the other end. You see, you have to tell them, explain to them that that shouldn't be right.
As for getting a ticket, it's absolutely hopeless now. I am registered blind and I can't see the machine. One time we could ask someone to help us. Now they're getting rid of the assistants, they're getting rid of the ticket offices. How are we supposed to get a ticket?
I was in Waterloo station and I'd lost my freedom pass, God forbid, which I rely on so much, and my purse. And so I only had some cash on me, but I tried to get a ticket to get to Greenwich North, and the machines wouldn't take any cash at all. There was no one, there's not even a cash, not even a place where you could buy a ticket. And I felt panic kind of setting in and my, eyes welling up in a sense, until I managed to grab hold of a station attendant. And he allowed me through the barriers for free and said, I'll phone through to Greenwich North. If it was someone who was maybe less confident, socially confident, they would be devastated. One size doesn't fit all. That's what it basically comes down to.
So as the technology increases in transport, people have told us that they feel pushed to go online. So what needs to be done? So people who are pushed to go online still face different encounters and barriers, which may cause feelings of isolation or shame. Given the scale of digital exclusion and disadvantage, the impact can have serious impacts on individuals. The transport industry should take the necessary steps to make transport inclusive, accessible, and affordable for all. Those who already face barriers while traveling around London are concerned about the offline options and the potential of staff presence being taken away. This means that their time while traveling may be limited. We have 9 recommendations that cover a wide of actions to take. These cover the following topics: equal fares for offline and online purchasing, staff visibility and assistance, providing support and mentoring, engaging in consultations and accessibility, providing more accessible services and resources, maintaining digital options before and during travel, and finally, further investigation into this topic. So now we'll listen to the last case study of today's presentation.
There should be alternative methods to communicate, to arrange travel assistants at the station. I need door-to-door, face-to-face contact for people just to use all their phones and devices to access when the next station is. If they need help from a member of staff on the train, there probably won't be any, perhaps just the driver. But that's another issue. There must always be a guard or somebody else present, because people like myself are extremely vulnerable. So what is that? What is the future? How are we going to be included?
We can no longer phone up for information, or if we do, we are asked to press this button, that button, or the other button, until you get quite confused about which button you're supposed to be choosing. How do people get on? I've got a computer. What about people who are digitally excluded because they don't have a computer, don't know how to use it? So they, in their complaints, get unheard.
If you find yourself on a station and there's no staff around, then you're really stumped because there's no one to kind of advise you or call for or whatever. And I understand there's a call point, and I didn't know about a call point. So, and I suppose being quite cynical, I doubt if there's anyone at the end of the line of the call point, I suspect.
So thank you so much to our case studies for being involved in this project. As you can see, digital exclusion and disadvantage has a huge impact on people's lives. We'll now go over to the panel discussion when we will discuss this further and hear from our panel of expertise in the represented groups in different areas. So I'll invite them on stage and give over to Callum. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Callum Marius, and I'm the transport editor for the new website My London, which is for our panel discussion this morning, where we'll be talking about the report's recommendations and discussing how we can turn them into tangible actions. Questions, if you're watching online, please feel free to submit the chat box, and I'm sure the questions from the right person. Wherever you are, we want you to join in the conversation. So I'm not really there, as Michael mentioned earlier, but we do have a hashtag for exclusion. So please make use of it. We want the conversation to continue. Okay? Like these discussions that we're having on stage, these are the discussions that we'll be having in your businesses and as passengers ourselves to ensure that we get digital inclusivity in our hospital. Let me introduce the panel. So first, I'm starting with Caroline Sittler, who is the CEO of Transport World.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. And we also have Alex Smith, who is the head of campaigns here at London TravelWatch. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, everyone.
And John McGee, who is the senior campaigns officer for HK London into elderly people and how. Yeah, I think I'm going to say too much. They go, John. Morning.
Thanks, Callum. Morning.
And Mark, who's the chief customer officer from TfL, and TfL's already had a few mentions this morning, so we'll be interested to hear. Excellent. So, again, if you like for this discussion, we're going to start with an introduction from each of our speakers. Then spend their key takeaways from the report, and really get their insights from their perspective. And then I'll be asking them some questions to try and follow up on those ideas and really understand what comes next. So what's conversation. Then I answer your questions, and yeah, then we'll continue. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce John.
Thanks, Callum. Thank you very much to London TravelWatch for inviting me. My name is John McGeeky, and I work at the charity Age UK London. I sometimes feel that there are lots of people that would rather pretend that digitally excluded people didn't exist, that digital exclusion wasn't a thing. However, digitally excluded and disadvantaged people are not going away. It's 2023 now. In 2033, this will still be a challenge. We live in a world where there are too many factors, too many inequalities, unfortunately, that mean that digital exclusion will be part of life for a long time yet. And that's why we have to really confront this now. All the research shows that older people make up a really high proportion of the digitally excluded. And Age UK London's research shows that there's around 200,000 Londoners over the age of 75 with no internet access at all. Digital exclusion and disadvantage is, of course, complicated, but we do know some people are more affected than others. So that might be an older disabled person, an older person on a low income, or of course, an older disabled person on a low income, and needless to say, lots of other people as well. I think this is a really, really excellent report. I think it's really vital that this is happening now. It almost feels like it's happening almost just before it's too late, because I think soon it will be too late to address some of these challenges. So thank you to London TravelWatch for publishing it. You've been committed to shining a light on digital exclusion for a long time. I certainly remember the excellent campaigning you did to protect stations from going cashless during the first part of the pandemic. Yeah, it's a really excellent report. Everyone in this room, I think, knows how important transport is to quality of life. But I think this is one of the first reports that I've seen that gets this really excellent balance and really strong spotlight on transport and digital exclusion. Some of the things I really like about the report include the way that multiple barriers and their consequences are highlighted. One particular barrier that I'd mention is it's often more expensive in life in general to be poor. So it's often people on the lowest incomes that miss out the most. And when it comes to digital exclusion in transport, clearly see that in the fact that if you are digitally excluded or disadvantaged, you're missing out on some of those cheaper advanced fares, some of those better deals. You know, the people that would benefit the most are the ones that are missing out potentially. Digitally excluded people take fewer journeys, and that's because travel can often be harder if you're digitally excluded, whether that's being unable to plan a journey, to pay for a ticket, having access to help and support, or being restricted to shorter journeys, which restricts you to who you can meet and what support you can access, where you can go shopping, and lots of other things as well. People take so many different types of journeys, but I would want to highlight those journeys that people take to meet friends and family and have those social connections that are so essential to our quality of life. 45% of Londoners over the age of 75 don't live on their own. And so when we make it harder for people to take journeys where they can go to places where they're connecting with others, what we're doing is we're making life harder for those people. Lastly, just to finish, I want to thank London TravelWatch for highlighting something that often isn't highlighted, and that's the emotional barriers and the emotional impacts of digital exclusion. I think too many people feel judged because they can't use certain digital apps. Too many people feel embarrassed that they need to ask help from a friend or a relative or a stranger. And too many people feel real anxiety about making journeys, especially longer journeys. So yeah, this is a really excellent report. It's really important, and thank you to London TravelWatch for publishing it.
Thanks, Callum. So yeah, good morning again, everyone. I'm Caroline Stickland. I'm CEO at Transport for All. I'm a white woman wearing a black roll neck top and green trousers. Very spring-like, trying to get the spring in the room. So Transport for All, if you're not aware of us, we're the disabled-led group who are breaking down barriers to transport access for disabled people across the UK and here in London. And at least 20% of the population are disabled, so that's over 14 million people. And while many disabled people are older people, as John's mentioned, not all of us are. So many working age adults, younger people and children are disabled. And when I say disabled people, I mean people who face barriers to accessing society due to a lack of accommodation for our needs. So those barriers could be about physical infrastructure, information and communication, the attitudes of staff or other passengers on transport, or digital exclusion or digital hesitancy. And those barriers have led to what's called the transport disability gap, the fact that disabled people make almost 30% fewer trips than non-disabled people. And that's a figure that hasn't changed for over 20 years. Really, really significant. And I really welcome the report that's launching today, and welcome the fact that the report notes that disabled people are more likely to be digitally excluded. So the proportion of disabled adults who do not use the internet is 23%, compared with only 6% of non-disabled people. And blind and visually impaired people are especially likely to be digitally excluded. Roughly 38% of blind and visually impaired people have never used the internet or have no internet access. So we really, as I say, really welcome the report that's coming out today. We think it sets out very clearly the barriers that disabled and other people face to digital access, but it also sets out some real opportunities for addressing those barriers and helping disabled people to travel with the same ease as everyone else. So there's three particular categories of barriers that are highlighted in the report that particularly wanted to touch on today. And the first is financial barriers. So before the current cost of living crisis, disabled people faced £583 on average higher monthly costs than non-disabled people. And the report highlights how increasingly concessionary passes for travel for disabled people must be applied for online, and how without access to digital payment methods, we're at risk of not getting the best value fare for our journey. So we want to see alternative payment methods such as cash being made available for all ticket purchases, and the best value ticket being available in all channels. We also really want to see staff remaining at stations and remaining in ticket offices so that they can support disabled people with using ticket machines or buying tickets over the counter. The second barrier highlighted in the report is technological barriers. And we know that close to half of disabled people feel they can't travel spontaneously because we need to plan our journeys in meticulous detail. Yet, as journey planning platforms increasingly pivot to online, there's a real danger that disabled people are being locked out of that aspect of making a journey as well. This might be because people don't have internet access, or it might be that those apps or those websites are not accessible to those of us who use screen readers or browse websites using mouseless technology. And I've mentioned journey planning, but actually that can be a barrier throughout transport for disabled people who are digitally excluded. So complaining when things go wrong, that's a really important part of being a passenger, being able to have your say and feeding back. But what if the complaint process is purely online? And what if the website where you log your complaint is not screen reader accessible? What if a local authority is planning a new piece of cycling infrastructure and the consultation to share your views on that new proposal is held online? What if the equality impact assessment for a new scheme takes into account maybe the physical or infrastructure impact on disabled people or older people, but doesn't think about the impact of a new scheme or form of transport on people who are digitally excluded? So we want to see recognition of digitally excluded and hesitant people in all stages of the transport life cycle. Taking the journey is important, but let's think about all the other aspects that come into travel as well. So the areas that I've mentioned are really significant barriers to using transport, and they can really actually undermine the really positive attempts that are being made by Transport for London and others to make journeys more accessible for disabled people. What good is it having step-free access at a station if someone doesn't know it's there? What good is it having a web page about how accessible buses might be for disabled people if blind and vision impaired people can't access that web page? These aren't extra details or nice to knows. This information is as important as knowing which platform your train is departing from and at what time.
Access denied.
So for disabled people to be able to travel with ease and confidence, we really must have this information accessible and readily available offline as well as online.
Access denied.
So I don't want to end on a negative. I think the report also has some really great opportunities and a really strong call to action for people who make decisions and people who hold power for transport in London. And we'd really welcome operators and others taking the actions that have been recommended and even going further so that you can make more of an impact for disabled Londoners and everyone who's digitally excluded. Thank you.
Now, can everyone hear me online? I hope so. Hello. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. And yeah, these are the kind of things that, you know, as a London transport journalist, I get in my email inbox. So it's great that the report is putting them in the spotlight. But these are real concerns, and it's great that they're getting coverage. I'd like to introduce Alex now, who is from London TravelWatch, works on this. And by the way, the report, it does look great, doesn't it? I mean, it's a really, really nice report. So not just an interesting read, but certainly eye-catching.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's great. I'm Alex Smith. Thank you for the introduction. Callum, a white woman wearing a burgundy blazer and a black and white dress, pronouns she, her. I'd like to start by thanking Caroline and John for their really insightful comments. I think it really highlights the impact that this can have on people and a whole range of people, and also the different ways that it can impact people. I think related to that, there are just so many different both ways it can impact people, but also different reasons for digital exclusion. I'm going to talk a bit more about how transport providers can address this. Sasha, thank you very much, previously outlined the recommendations in our presentation, but I'll go into them in a bit more detail. And I think these are really important as a way to make sure that digitally excluded and disadvantaged people have the tools and support that give them the same degree of access to things like fares, tickets, and information as the digitally included, and making sure that what is being provided is actually accessible, as Caroline very rightly points out. So there's a range of recommendations, and that's in part due to the range of reasons for digital exclusion and disadvantage. So just for simplicity, I'll split it into three categories. So the first is continuing to provide the current tools and support that people use when traveling. So that can be things like maintaining the ability to pay by cash, making sure information is continued to provide in different formats. So for example, posters and leaflets. And perhaps most importantly, is making sure that their staff are available. They're in easy to find places, they're in accessible locations, and they're confident to support people. As Sasha mentioned, they're an important source of information for people when they're traveling around London. The next kind of broad grouping is bringing in new measures to make sure services are more accessible and easier to use A really big part of this is accessibility. When we say accessibility, that covers a whole range of things. There's not kind of one band-aid to it. So for example, looking at things like ticket machines, are they at a height that everyone can use? Can a wheelchair user use them? Can you pay by cash? Are there audiovisual options? And again, you need to look at it in the round, looking at it holistically to make sure that it is kind of as accessible as it can be. More generally, are website screen reader compatible? Is text on posters clear? Is there enough information for people? Not just a QR code that they might not be able to scan. And then also sort of things around affordability. So you might have a smartphone where you can look at things online, but you can't afford the data. Could a station offer free Wi-Fi so that they can access that? And then also things like mentoring schemes. I know TfL already have one to give people who want to be involved and can be involved and don't necessarily face some of the barriers that others face, but they don't necessarily have the skills and confidence to do so. Finally, just throughout all of this, transport operators and everyone involved needs to make sure that they're working with the impacted groups to come up with the solutions to this, to address the issue. So for example, if they want to make a change, are they meaningfully consulting with people with lived experiences, specialists in things like digital exclusion, organizations like Transport for All and AGK. And then also collaboration, where possible, co-design, co-production. And again, I think this is a good bit of research, and I think hopefully kind of creates, gives a picture of the situation. But I think there's more that can be done and looked into further. Again, creates a picture, but I think even myself looking at the findings, there are more questions. Can we look at things in more depth and from different angles? And again, throughout all of that, can we include people with lived experience, people who are most at risk of digital exclusion and disadvantage? So that's a very broad overview of what we think needs to be done. But I should also say this is very much an ongoing conversation for us. We know other organizations have been working on this for a while. Welcome as many voices as in the debate as we can get, sort of on the recommendations, where can we go further, as Caroline mentioned, what more can be done. And again, there's no one size fits all. We know this isn't necessarily a quick and easy task. It does require thought, it does require resource, it does require time. But transport is so vital to so many different parts of everyone's life, whether it's getting to work, seeing friends and family, getting to healthcare appointments, the list goes on. So it's just so important that everyone can have access to it, which is again why we think it's really important that transport providers do act to address digital exclusion and disadvantage wherever they can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We're going to move straight on to Mark from TfL for your introduction. Hi, Mark.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark. Transport for London is the integrated transport provider in our capital city, operating the London Underground, buses, the Elizabeth line, London Underground, Scotland, Light Railway, and supporting sustainable travel as well. We work really in close collaboration with Network of Rail and train operating companies as well for those overground sort of heavy rail services that also come to us. Making the transport network more accessible and inclusive is a top priority for Transport for London. We know that.
1 second.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if the people online perhaps were able to hear, so my apologies for that. But just to recap, that making the transport network more accessible and inclusive is a top priority for Transport for London. We recognise that there are too many barriers for some people in making use of the transport network. And we also recognise that a more accessible public transport system benefits everyone. We welcome the report by London TravelWatch, which offers some insight into some really important concerns that need to be addressed by everyone working in the transport industry to ensure that customers that don't have access to smart devices, computers, or don't want to make use of those devices are still catered for and able to make journeys on the transport network. We're committed to ensuring that customers can get the right information at our stations and stops to help them to plan and undertake their journey. At our stations and stops, we already provide a quite an extensive array of static customer information, whether that's maps to help people to plan their routes, timetable information, information around the surrounding environment so that people are able to continue their journey. And we're increasingly providing up-to-date real-time information through screens at stops and in stations as well, so that people have access to the latest information so that if there is disruption on the network, they're able to replan their journey. We recognise the vital role played by our operational colleagues in supporting people to undertake journeys on the network, whether that's to plan their routes, to buy a ticket, whether that's to provide advice during disruption, of which we've got quite a lot today, or with any other concerns that people might have that is affecting their confidence to undertake journeys on the network. And that's why all of our stations on the London Underground network, Elizabeth Line and London Overground network are staffed from first to last train, and why it's so important that we continue to provide those operational colleagues with the training and the equipment that they need to provide high quality customer information to everybody that's using our network. A key part of that is training, and we do a lot of disability and equality training working with external providers who many of whom have lived experiences of some of the barriers that are still in place if you're trying to make use of public transport in London. We are very proud of the mentoring service that we provide to people who potentially aren't confident in making use of the service. People are able to arrange a telephone call with an advisor to sort of give them some ideas and tips. If that's insufficient, we're able to host days where people can get confident in using bus and tube services, or we're even able to provide sort of one-to-one sort of coaching advice and sort of undertake those first sort of key trips on the network so that people have that confidence to undertake journeys. Well, we need to cater for all of our customers with our information, and noting what the sort of the topic of today's report is. We do recognise that digital tools can play a really important part in overcoming some barriers on the transport network, and that's why we do think it's important to continue to develop those digital tools, whether that be the TfL website, the TfL Go app, or working with external providers to provide better or different information to enable people to undertake those journeys, so that right from the planning stage through to starting a journey, interchanging, and then sort of exiting and continuing on to your final destination, we've got support in place to enable that to take place as seamlessly as possible. As has been already mentioned, though, information is only one of the barriers to people making use of the network as well. We appreciate that physical accessibility remains a key challenge as well, and are working hard to overcome that. We're pleased that we continue to add more and more step-free stations to the London Underground network. Obviously, the opening of the Elizabeth line has provided an accessible network right through the heart of London as well, alongside sort of increasing numbers of stations, both on the London Overground network and on the DLR as well, that provide step-free access. But again, we need to ensure that we are providing support so that people are able to use those journeys. And again, why our operational colleagues are so important in doing that. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of enabling spontaneous journeys on the network. And this is another area where we remain sort of convinced that our turn up and go service is a very good service offering to people that need assistance in starting their journeys, interchanging, and sort of exiting a station at the other end. This is a service where, again, our operational colleagues are able to assist anybody that needs additional help in using the transport service to move seamlessly through our stations, or as seamlessly as possible through our stations. So again, we welcome London TravelWatch's report here. It is a reminder for us that we need to remain focused on providing a transport network that is caters for everybody, and especially those who are digitally excluded. We recognise the importance of working with stakeholder groups such as Age UK, such as Transport for All, in better understanding what those challenges are so that we can make sure that we prioritise the funds that we have in order to make the transport network more accessible in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And it was interesting when I was reporting on the Elizabeth line to see those trials take place where, you know, you're starting from scratch. You can have those, you know, that inclusive design, and you can bring along people with disabilities, wheelchair users to test the stations. In a weird way, I suppose you need to go back to the future in a way on the rest of the network. So we'll dig into that, I'm sure. Now let's talk about questions, wider questions, and sort of open up our discussion. I want to start with Caroline, and I'm thinking about, for instance, I go and see my grandmother in Wembley, and there's 2 bus routes which go past her house, and one has been there for years and years and years, and one has been there for a few years. And I took the second one recently to go and visit her, and she said, I don't know where that goes. And then I thought to myself, how can you not know where that goes? And I was thinking, well, obviously I know where it goes because I use my smartphone. I know where it goes because I've got the internet. I'm a bit of a transport geek, so of course I'm going to know where it goes. But, you know, for her to find out where it goes, there aren't opportunities. You know, she can't. There's no printed maps, for instance. There's not one printed bus map made available. And I think then when she asked me where it goes, I think there's she almost feels undignified. It's almost, you know, it's a question of sort of a respect, sort of, and a dignity thing, and that's very hard to quantify. I imagine, you know, for Transport for All, you know, you must have a lot of people who feel the same way. So how do you go about quantifying these feelings, these concerns, and then, you know, turning the recommendations like we've seen today, you know, for offline resources into actions? How do we go about that?
Thank you. Wow, how long have I got? I think it's a really important question, and what we do want to see from the report today is action. So turning these recommendations, turning the really great learnings from the research into change for disabled people and anyone who is digitally excluded or hesitant. So I think the example that you shared is a really live one, and it does happen to many, many disabled and older Londoners. And it's why we think that all forms of information should be available offline and online. And I think there are some good examples of that. So if we look at rail industry, for example, in all train operating companies' accessible travel policies, there's a requirement to have a leaflet at stations on what assistance is available for disabled people, how to get support with booking assistance or planning a journey. However, across the rail network, there are multiple train operating companies, and clearly we don't just make one mode of journey. So we might be getting the bus to the train station, we might be walking to the train station. So how do we make sure that a similar level of information is available offline for all those different modes? And I think that variation in itself, that fragmentation of the transport system in itself, can provide a barrier when we don't know where to look for that information. And then when we do, that information may not be accessible to us. So that really, for me, brings home the importance of staff being available, because we may not want to have to kind of seek out that information through family and friends, like you mentioned. That might lead to some stigma or some embarrassment. So if we can make sure that staff are available, whether that's on buses, at bus stations, on train stations, it's at rail ticket offices, so that there's a friendly face who is available to help us with planning our journey or getting information about the services that are available to us, that's really, really important. So we would love to see kind of commitments from colleagues across the transport industry to maintaining staff on vehicles, at ticket offices, in stations, and for those staff to receive really good quality disability equality training that's delivered by disabled people or people with lived experience, so that the really tangible impact of not having that information can be learnt by staff who can then provide that service in a really high quality way.
Thank you very much. Just going on to John now, I wonder if you can explain to us the sort of wider impact that digital exclusion can have in all the Londoners' lives, and you know, people who you know, like my grandmother, might feel, you know, digitally excluded. You know, what can they do to raise their concerns?
Well, I mean, just on impacts, there are so many, and I won't be able to mention them all. But if I was going to highlight a few, I would say that even before the pandemic, there's lots of research that said that around 200,000 older Londoners can go for up to 4 weeks without someone visiting them in their home or without going somewhere to visit someone else. And how do you make that happen? Travel makes that happen. Journeys make that happen. So this is the wider impact of digital exclusion and transport. Social isolation is absolutely a key part of the story. As I said earlier, lots of people, half the people over the age of 75 don't live with anyone else. And when we think of those journeys, they play such a huge role in people's lives. That's the journey to the coffee shop to meet your friend. It's to the supermarket where you might bump into someone that you haven't seen for months. It's the journey to the social club, the lunch club, the exercise class that you go to. It's the journey to maybe a support service where you can access services. And if you're making those journeys harder, think of all the barriers that you're putting in people's ways. That has such an impact on people's standard of living and quality of life. I mentioned social isolation, and that paints a certain picture, but I'd also encourage people to look at it in a way which is about the contribution that all Londoners, older Londoners, disabled Londoners, everyone makes to the city. Might be in the economy as workers, as customers, but it's also as carers, especially unpaid carers, volunteers at organisations, lots of info, the grandparent that picks the kids up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, someone, say, in their early 60s that travels to a neighbouring borough to help an older parent to maybe have breakfast in the morning. All of that contribution, without that, everyone's missing out, not just the people affected, but society as a whole misses out. So I'd raise social isolation, the contribution people make. And then again, something that all raised so far in terms of impacts, just the kind of the well-being impacts of this. We've all sort of wanted to bash a keyboard or look at a certain stage. People that are digitally excluded, they're constantly battling it's a constant wherever it is, accessing whatever service, transport, benefits, banking, paying bills, health, whatever it is. So there's the emotional impact. So that's what I would say. In terms of sort of raising concerns, I guess it's partly about thinking about who you can raise those concerns to. And so some of the groups that I would mention are being in touch with the operators, the rail companies, TfL and others. I think Caroline mentioned the power of complaining, but it can't be underestimated. People being heard. Of course, there's the element, how easy is it to be heard if you are not online in the first place? But I'd say, TfL, they do have a phone line, and the accessibility team and groups like their Independent Disability Advisory Group. Some of the rail operators have accessibility support groups as mobility forums in lots of boroughs. So engage and raise concerns with those. I'm on the stage with two incredible organisations that advocate for passengers. So absolutely work with London TravelWatch and Transport for All, because they're doing fantastic stuff, and there are lots of ways to reach them. Another group I'd mention is politicians. So that could be the MP with 3 stations in their constituency that are being understaffed, or where staffing's being cut, and can speak to the Secretary of State. But but maybe more for TfL, think about who your assembly member is. You know, the deputy mayor for transport is also the deputy chair for transport. Sadiq is the chair for transport for London. So absolutely raise it with assembly members as well. And just in case anyone's listening that is digitally excluded or disadvantaged and is wondering about support in general, you can think about your local library, adult education college, organizations like Citizens Online, Digital Unite, Local Educators, where you can get confidence, because confidence is a huge part of this.
Excellent. And just a little cheeky plug, I'd also say you're a friendly transport journalist around the capital as well. Thank you. Mark, let's take a journey, for instance, from Croydon to Camden. Part of that's going to be on National Rail and part of it's going to be on TfL. So how does TfL work to ensure that there's not that sort of friction, that barrier, that seamless journey?
Well, we do know that interchange can be a point where journeys come unstuck. They can be complicated for the reasons that have been mentioned earlier. We've got different operators sort of taking responsibility for different legs of the journey. I guess what I would say is that at the vast majority of interchange locations, certainly the bigger ones, increasingly we're taking sort of a one-team approach where the Transport for London team at that location works alongside the train operating company with other services. Sorry, didn't quite pick up the comment. London Bridge is a good example where there is sort of one transport team in place. There are Liverpool Street, all of the larger ones where there are sort of weekly meetings where the challenges either on for our services or for the National Rail services are discussed. Complaints that come in are talked about, where have things gone wrong on the network, so that they can plan out how they can work collaboratively there. And that's proven to be very successful. More work to do, but it is sort of improving. We have working groups across the transport industry that pick up specific points, whether that be around the provision of customer information, whether that's on accessibility issues, where together with the rail delivery group, again, National Rail colleagues, train operators and TfL, we talk out the issues and where we've had successes and where we've had problems. It's we are very willing to shamelessly steal from others in the industry in order to try to make improvements to the services that we have. And then I guess what we often do is look at, our customer satisfaction scores, their scores as well. Certainly, I guess a good case study would be as we sort of started to come out of the restrictions that were put in place for travel as a result of the COVID pandemic. We knew that a lot of people would be traveling again for the first time, and that confidence was highly likely to be an issue in making some journeys. Equally, we knew that our operational colleagues were out of practice from providing good customer service because for quite a period of time, there weren't many customers and they were being precluded from actually getting close to those customers to provide service in some instances. And so that was an example where we looked at how we're operating in particular locations, what the handovers were, a reminder of where sort of our services sort of interfaced with each other and getting people to talk to one another, because often when interchanges take place, it is so important to have a good working relationship with operational colleagues there. So we sort of went through that process as well. It's certainly we haven't cracked it. It's an area where we continue to work on. It's an area where we continue to get complaints around. But yeah, I think there have been improvements, but we'll do more.
And just really quickly, 20-30 seconds. What sort of metrics then are you looking? I mean, you mentioned customer satisfaction, and where could we find that information as well?
So for Transport for London, I guess this is sort of we provide it on our website, a very good example of where that's but equally, I guess that's one of the safety nets that we have is our TfL contact center. which people are able to get in touch with. And I guess predominantly that service is used for people who are planning a journey, wanting to inquire about ticketing charges, have lost property. But equally, it's a group of people that are there to provide information to our customers. And so, we have a number of information products, whether that's maps, timetables, or things like the reports that we sort of provide on our performance, where contact center staff are able to print out that information and send it on to customers if that's what they would like.
Okay, excellent. Alex, so just before we go to the audience questions, it's a bit of a devil's advocate question, I suppose, but is the report, do you have a positive or would you say negative outlook on where we're going in terms of digital exclusion right now?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think first thing is worth acknowledging the difficult sort of situation that the economy is in at the moment, and that a lot of people are facing. Budgets and finances are tight. As I mentioned, some of these measures may cost a bit of money, but to that I would say, arguably transport operators are leaving money on the table by not enabling people to travel. So I think that could be a way to actually increase revenues, bringing people on. So I think there's kind of an incentive there. I mean, I would argue even if it didn't, it's kind of right to make sure that, again, technology can bring a lot of benefits, but, it shouldn't be at the expense of digitally excluded and included people. And also technology, we've kind of focused on how it can hinder or limit participation for some people, but at the same time, it can also facilitate it. So hopefully, there are kind of innovations that we could use to, again, make it more accessible. Again, not forgetting sort of the more analog options for people who can't access them. But again, I think there is kind of a lot of opportunity there. And I think also it's great to hear so many people talking about it. I think that's another aspect to it, is just making sure it is on the agenda so that people are taking it seriously. And it's great to, thank you again, everyone who managed to turn up in person, but also everyone online. I think we had a lot of interest, which is great. And again, shows that I think there is a lot of interest in this and making sure that it is fully addressed.
Great stuff. Now we're going to throw it open to questions. So please, how are we going to do it, Sasha? Oh, so I'll repeat the question. Yeah, sure thing.
Yes, I'm just interested, just looking into information. Why isn't there a representative here of Southern and South Eastern as part of TravelWatch? Because of the cut and cover costs. We are dependent on a failing railway system. And all the stations around me, it's very different between the platform and the train, and the ticket office is where you can ask for someone to put out a run. No longer exist, or else they're only open for a couple of hours in the morning at rush hour. So there's no one on buggy or chair, or if you're a wheelchair or blind like me. So out of curiosity, where is South East?
Thank you so much, Jane. The question was about Southeastern, which we know has had some difficulties with its new timetable. And I get a lot of emails about it, put it that way. And the question was why could Southeastern be here today? So I'm going to pose that to Alex.
Yep, thank you. You said very aware at London TravelWatch of kind of the issues around the new timetable and sort of more widely, and we have been engaging with Southeastern in terms of their presence today. I think it's partly just a logistical sort of thing. There's, over a dozen train operators, can't have them all on the stage. Yeah, so I think just as well, this event hopefully is important and getting the message out there. But as an organization, we are also kind of going out and speaking to each individual train operator, transport operators across the board. So that's certainly something that we can raise with them as well in future.
Thank you. Any further questions?
We talk about your budget in London. You talk about the house, COVID. Now talk to the driver. No one with disability is quite fine for the cab. Over a year and a half ago, you sold voice boxes, saying what the bank saying, and it fit the buses. I'm yet to see one fit the bus. So, you know, there's a big problem with disabled people that travel. Asking for assistance, nothing much more than problem.
Thank you for the question. Gentleman here, Kevin, was explaining that during the COVID, the height of the COVID lockdowns, TfL implemented extra safety features on its buses, which meant that cabs were effectively sealed off. And you'll remember that people had to board from the middle doors, and that he understood that TfL were looking at implementing things like voice boxes, which you have in banks, so microphones that will help passengers communicate with the driver, and why they haven't appeared. So, Mark?
I think it's a known problem, and it is something which we appreciate that for customers who need that extra assistance, it can be more difficult to communicate with the driver. There have been various solutions looked at. To be honest, I'm not sure where we are with the rollout of that. So I guess what I can endeavour to do is go back, speak to the colleagues that are working on that project and come back with information as to sort of where we are with addressing it. Kevin, you've got another question.
That was a year ago, and I said, all the buses that were rolling out the package. I've seen many buses, that's not quite right.
And the follow-up was just about the new buses there. Why are new buses not being rolled out with this pre-installed?
Yeah, so I will check. I thought that it was the case that it was being addressed on new buses. Obviously, we've got in excess of 8,000 buses on the network, so there is a turnover as those new buses come on. But a commitment to come back to TravelWatch, who I'm sure will be able to provide information to the attendees, both in person today and online, with where we are with that particular project.
Okay, you heard it there here first, everyone. Back row there, the gentleman.
Thanks so much for all the panelists today. Everyone involved in the report and all the organisations for doing this work as well. My question really is, I'm struck by what John was saying, that this is something that could stay with us for a long time, possibly forever. Everyone in this room may feel that they're digitally included at the moment. However, technology moves at such a pace, we can very quickly lose confidence. So I think my appeal to the industry in Transport for London is something which should be permanently on the agenda, because technology will leave us all behind at some point. Even the people in their teams at the moment, they're very proficient, which of course they will be able to take by technology into the strength at such pace. So I do think this needs to be something that's part of the agenda forever.
Thank you so much, Arthur. That question was about digital inclusion being a priority long term, particularly because, you know, as technology develops, so will how people are digitally included or excluded. And actually, that's a really interesting point, because I think, you know, I'm 28 and you cannot find more of a transport geek than me, to be honest with you. And on my line, I cannot use, I mean, we now have contactless payments, but I can't use my rail card with it. So therefore I have to buy a paper ticket. And if I can't buy a paper ticket, then there's a problem, because then I have to pay more. And it's all sort of things like that. And this is, you know, if I find a way around something, I mean, it's going to be me who's going to find it around. But yet there's that sort of problem. Caroline, actually, I'd like to put that to you.
Thanks, Callum, and thank you, Arthur, for raising that. I think it's really, really important. It's something that is a key focus for us at Transport for All in terms of what we're seeing across the transport sector in this sort of push to modernisation. And I'm making quote marks with my fingers when I say that. And whether that's through the proposed or potential closure of rail station ticket offices, whether it's through moving staff from outside of ticket offices to be kind of roaming on the stations, I think there's a lot of ideas or proposals that are being put out there in the name of modernisation without that future proofing, as you mentioned, Arthur, around making sure that there aren't unintended consequences of those proposals for people today and also in the future. So really specific example for that in terms of people who are digitally excluded is being able to buy a ticket, like you said, Callum, using a concession or a rail card, if there isn't a staff ticket office, excuse me. So for example, I have a Freedom Pass and I have a disabled person's rail card. And the only way that I can buy a ticket combining those two together is by buying it from a person in the ticket office, because the ticket vending machines at my station don't accept those two in combination. And that's a bit of anecdata, that's my lived experience, but it's not unique to me. And it also applies for the 50% wheelchair user discount and many other concessions that disabled and older people are eligible for. However, the modern technology and the move to more digital methods of buying tickets do mean that we lose out. So I think the recommendations in the report, if they were to be implemented, would go a long way to future-proofing those sorts of services. For example, making sure that the same discounts and the same price tickets are available, whatever method you use them. However, at Transport for All, we've been here for 40 years and we will continue to be here raising this point for the future, because this isn't going to go away. And as John said, as more modern technology comes on board, we need to be future-proofing our systems to make sure that no one is locked out. So I guess my challenge to decision makers, power holders, transport operators is forget about digitally excluded at your peril, because groups like Transport for All will be here knocking on your door and reminding you that people with lived experience need to be listened to when you're making these decisions and making plans for the future of the transport network.
Sure thing, thank you. And I'm sure the representative for DFT would say that all their consultations, they consult on all their changes, just to be impartial. Yes, I believe we have some. I'll take one last question from the room, and then I believe we've got some questions online, if that's okay. Sure.
There's no danger that's in stores, and in light of people that might be excluded or disadvantaged, are there methodologies that are using to gather that information that would include those groups and offline methodologies? And then as a second point around the emotional impact that you talked about today, are you doing any quantitative that you're publishing around the emotional impact, not just the pure effectiveness?
So the question was around what sort of metrics you can get for offline groups, and also how you can sort of quantify the emotional impact and things like that. So just Mark, if you can.
So we work with the inside agencies that collect this information on our behalf to ensure that we have a representative sample which reflects all of the different potential barriers faced by people making use of transportation in London. So the collection methodology, whilst in some instances is predominantly online, it'll be supplemented through interviews and other things in order to ensure that the sample as a whole is as representative as it can be. I guess what we also understand is that quantitative data by itself gives you one picture, and it's really helpful in order to both identify issues, but importantly track progress to see if you're making improvements, or potentially if you've done something, as we talked about earlier, that might have had an unintended consequence and is making things worse. So that sort of quantitative information is important, but it must be supplemented with qualitative research as well. So we undertake focus groups with customers to understand their thoughts on changes that we're proposing as well, and we sort of piece all of that together. Obviously, another really important part is working with a variety of different stakeholder groups who raise those concerns on our to us as well, so that we're able to look at that. In terms of understanding the emotional impact, it is something which we look at more generally about people making use of public transport. It's not something which we have looked at previously specifically in relation to digital exclusion or digital deprivation in any way. Having sort of had a light shone on that particular issue through this research, it's something which we will look at in the future. But I guess what we do understand is that confidence in traveling plays a huge issue in the way that people feel when it comes to understanding what journey, how to undertake a journey, perceptions of safety and security on the network. All of these factors play into how people make use of the network, and it's just as important for us to understand that side of the way that customers feel, alongside potentially sort of physical barriers and other things which are affecting the way that people travel around the city.
Thanks so much. Let's take a question from online.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? So someone from online has been asking for TfL, but they're asking what with the train operating companies about the proposed ticket office closures. I guess that would apply to all the panelists in terms of mitigations and sort of what we can do to protect digitally excluded and disadvantaged Londoners.
Okay, if we can do maybe 20, 30 seconds for each of Mark and John, I think. Just generally, the question was about what TfL is doing and can do to consult on ticket office proposed closures. Thank you.
I guess I'd sort of say that it's not TfL's role in the way that sort of the rail industry is set up to.
But you can advocate for it.
And I guess what we have done through our decisions around to continue to staff our stations from first to last train, and the importance that we continue to put on having a colleague presence in stations that can assist with all manner of customer inquiries, I guess demonstrates that we believe that it's still vitally important to have members of staff at stations on the network, and certainly that's what we intend to continue to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say to TfL, and I appreciate this complicated, but please use as much influence as you can, because you can't underestimate how important this is, whether it's buying tickets, but accessing support, feeling safer at a station, even things like having a staff member that's needed to unlock a toilet, for example. It's such an important issue, and I think everyone's got a role to play to influence the government, influence the operators, and shine more of a light on this.
Thank you very much to our panel this morning. I think that's where we're going to wrap it up. I suppose really for me, I suppose the key to takeaway is this is really a quality of life issue. I think that's very clear. If we look at statistics, and if it's 40,000 people affected or 200,000 people affected, but it's 200,000 people who are more than upset, who are greatly impacted by feeling excluded as part of our society. Do we want that? I think reading the report myself, you will see the case studies in there. You'll see, these are people, Malcolm saying that if something goes wrong during disruption to his journey, my whole world crumbles. And I think that's really important. So I'm glad that we've managed to sort of put some words, put some feelings, and really put the people around the figures in this discussion today. So my thanks to our panelists again. Caroline from Transport for All, Alex from London TravelWatch, John from Age UK London, and Mark from TfL. That's where we're going to wrap it. Thank you so much.
Just a few final words from me from a TravelWatch perspective. Before letting you all go, since you've probably allowed a little bit more time for your journeys, and I'm sure you want to know what the Chancellor has got to say in today's budget, whatever that may hold. It's difficult to try and channel what's been a kind of really rich conversation around the panel through the comments here and online and through the content in the report. But I guess a couple of observations. The first one is, I think, the same thought that Callum was just expressing there, which is that as TravelWatch, we've come to an issue through a transport lens. This is actually a much bigger issue, a quality of life issue. It affects many people. There are many statistics in the report and that have been shared around the panel, but ultimately this is a human story. What really struck me from the comments on stage and also in the report is that those people who are digitally excluded or disadvantaged are actually experiencing that in many ways, in the way that they handle their personal finances, in managing their healthcare, in managing their parenting responsibilities. And we've come at it from a transport point of view, which is yet another dimension of their life, which is being made difficult through the barriers that digital access presents. And I guess that leaves me with two thoughts on that particular point. One, this is a big issue that actually needs to be resolved. It needs tackling by all of us. And that leads me to the other thought, which is that we're looking at this from the perspective of what transport operators, and it isn't just TfL, it is indeed train operating companies and others. What is it that we can do in the transport world? But actually, maybe this is something that needs to be embraced, not just by transport, the world of transport, but collectively with the worlds of finance and healthcare and others. Just a thought that occurred to me listening to the conversation. Two other final thoughts. There are many other opportunities for people who find digital forms of communication challenging, for them to access information or to pay for their travel. But actually, what I think the panel has been very good at highlighting, and the report does this as well, is that many of those channels themselves are imperfect. So whether it's about engaging with a member of staff, or relying upon information in writing at a bus stop, or using ticket machines to buy your tickets, all of these things are flawed. And they are hampering the extent to which people who find digital forms of communication difficult in accessing travel. We need to address those through the transport providers. The great news is, if we tackle those issues from the point of view of making life better for the digitally excluded and disadvantaged, we're actually making life better for everyone who uses public transport. This isn't just a narrow interest. This is actually something which benefits potentially many more of us. And finally, thinking of the upside, what's the upside in this? Because we're asking people to change the way that they do things. And it's the ongoing story about access, one way or another, making access easier. Yes, there are all sorts of reasons why operators haven't done these things before, and no doubt there will be costs associated with them. But in a way, we already, or transport operators already make provision, whether it's physical access or otherwise, and in terms of offering concessionary fares to certain parts of society that deserve to have their needs recognized. And today really is about just saying to the world of transport, go that extra 9 yards. Let's look at this other dimension of access or lack of access through digital forms of communication. And let's try and make things better for those people that find those things really challenging. So those are my final parting thoughts. I'm sure many of you, both here and online, will have many other thoughts as well. We really hope that today's report has, well, I guess, inspired you to all think about this in a way that perhaps we haven't thought about, has inspired operators to say, this is something to which we need to commit action and resource. And we really hope and look forward to continuing the conversation with everyone further. So thank you for your attention. Have a great day. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you one way or another in the near future. Thank you.
The event officially closes at 12, so I think that's up for about 15 minutes.